today on Ag News Daily.
You know, people change for two reasons, and I truly believe this, and I say it a lot. People change, one, because they have to, they're forced to, or two, because they become educated. And I think you're experiencing both of those in today's environment with all of the pressures being put on farmers.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Welcome back to the studio.
Thank you. I was in D.C. this week. We're going to hear from some legislators that I heard from this week as well.
Yeah, you never take me on any of these fun trips.
Well, the weather was pretty nice, too, so no complaints about being out there.
That's right. We saw a slow-moving low-pressure system that brought a few light showers to the far southern Midwest area yesterday. Elsewhere, we saw dry conditions continue across most of our region, creating an ideal weather for field work and advancing planting progress. That same low could swing back next week and bring scattered showers to parts of the Midwest, but for now, dry weather is expected to continue. We're looking at support for early crop growth. If that dry stretch lingers on for too long, however, there are concerns about expanded dryness that could surface. A shift to a more active weather pattern is expected later next week with widespread rains, although not guaranteed, meaning that some of these areas that are dry could still miss out. Currently, most of the Midwest remains drought-free thanks to that solid precipitation during late winter and early spring. We do see signs of abnormal dryness in parts of northwestern Indiana, northern Illinois, and northwestern Missouri. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But while in Washington, D.C., as mentioned, Delaney got to catch up with USDA's chief meteorologist, Brad Rippey, and we have more insights from him on the hurricane season.
There will be a NOAA hurricane outlook later in May, a couple of weeks from now. But the pioneers in hurricane forecasting at Colorado State already put out their forecast. It calls for 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes above the 30-year averages of 14, 7, and 3. And they also give, the NOAA will not do this, but the entire U.S. coastline from Brownsville, Texas to Eastport, Maine, in a typical year, there is a 43% chance of a major hurricane strike. They are going with a 51% chance of that happening this year.
Well, as Brad was saying, there's certainly going to be an interesting year this year for extreme weather conditions, but that hasn't kept farmers out of the field as corn and soybean planting made some solid progress, according to the latest report. While some key growing areas experienced rainfall that did cause some brief delays, moisture is expected to benefit, of course, here the long-term crop development. According to the USDA's latest report, 40% of the nation's corn crop is now planted slightly ahead of the 5-year average, with 11% emerged. That's also ahead of the average 5-year pace. Soybean planting is moving even faster, with 30% in the ground compared to the typical 23%, and 7% emerged on that side. Widespread rains also helped improve winter wheat conditions. USDA reports 51% of the crop rated good to excellent, up 2 percentage points from the last week, and 1 point better than a year ago. Meanwhile, 39% of the crop has headed ahead of the 33% average. Spring wheat is also off to a quick start, with 44% planted and 13% emerged. We're done planting, Tanner. What about your family?
Pretty much all done. Just a little bit left for some double crop soybeans. Yeah. Did talk to a custom harvester, though, that said their wheat might be a little short this year in the Texas area. So if you're in Texas, let us know. But we've got news. The United States and United Kingdom have reached a new trade agreement, the first since President Trump introduced the sweeping tariff plan. Speaking at the White House yesterday, Thursday, May 8th, in the morning, President Trump announced the great deal for both countries, highlighting major gains for American agriculture. He said the agreement includes billions of dollars of increased market access for American exports, especially for products like beef, ethanol, and other goods that are produced by U.S. farmers. A White House fact sheet reports that the deal will open up $5 billion in new export opportunities for American farmers, ranchers, and producers. This will include more than $700 million in ethanol exports, $250 million in beef and other agricultural products. So big news announced there. This agreement also outlines commitments from both of these countries to work together on expanding access to industrial and agricultural markets. So I expect more information to come from that. President Trump did add that similar trade deals are in works with other nations. So lots of progress being made this week. Delaney, you must have been busy out in Washington, D.C.
We certainly were. We're going to touch a little bit on some of that here, too. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said there could be substantial progress in U.S.-China trade talks in the coming weeks. In an interview with CNBC, Bessent struck a cautiously optimistic tone, but also made it clear that the next steps depend on Beijing. However, Tanner, as we know, we just got word that the U.S. and China are sitting down at the table this weekend in Geneva, Switzerland, to talk more about those ongoing trade deals. So Secretary Bessent is certainly optimistic about that. He said U.S. supply chains have already buffered by advanced retail orders, limiting some short-term impacts. However, long-term impacts are where we will see things go if we don't see some concrete first steps here. Bessent outlined a multi-phase process. He said they want to start with tariff de-escalation. Hopefully we'll see some of that coming out of the Geneva meetings, followed by broader negotiations on non-tariff barriers and intellectual property protections. China maintains that at that time no formal talks were happening, but as we know now, we are seeing that course change heading into the weekend. And when I was in Washington, D.C. this week, we got to chat with Secretary Rollins, and she thinks that there are quite a few trade deals in the works right now.
Just yesterday, I was at the White House. I was there for different reasons, but there were 3 different countries, I think, in the White House currently in negotiations with not just Secretary Lutnick or Secretary Bessent or Jamieson Greer, but with the president himself. He is so leaned in on all of this. So I think we're going to have some very good news very soon, and hopefully we're able to mitigate some of that mental health.
Well, that was some exciting updates, Delaney. You were busy. I'm going to see how many times I can say that. But while there currently is Waters of the United States rule in place, WOTUS, the future of its implementation remains uncertain. Mary Thomas Hart, the chief counsel for National Beef Cattlemen's Association, said the current rule stems from a 2023 unanimous Supreme Court decision, and that ruling threw out the long-standing significant nexus text, replacing it with a narrower standard. Now, only relatively permanent waters and wetlands with a continuous surface connection fall under this federal jurisdiction. Hart also said while the Biden administration incorporated the court's decision into the WOTUS rules, many farmers and stakeholders felt enforcement was overly aggressive. As a result, the Trump administration has begun gathering feedback from those affected to determine whether additional rulemaking or clearer implementation guidance — that's a mouthful — clearer implementation guidance is needed. Hart said that she's optimistic the issue remains a priority for the current administration. So let's hear from the EPA's administrator, Lee Zeldin's perspective, where administration is at with WOTUS from when Delaney was in Washington, D.C. this week. Here we go.
I'm operating more simply and in principle in how to approach the WOTUS rulemaking. We have a definition from SACIT that we're inheriting from the Supreme Court. We have a map of America that has states operating under multiple definitions. We have a whole lot of feedback from farmers, ranchers, landowners, states of how the current rule is not working for them. And I believe we have a very clear path on how to finalize a simple definition that would allow the entire country to be operating off of the same definition that farmers, ranchers, landowners, states will be happy with. We'll have a public comment period. You just referenced the listening sessions. We are going to continue to solicit as much feedback as we possibly can, and to come up with a definition that we hopefully can withstand the test of time. As far as timelines go, there are opportunities to be able to have efficiencies in this timeline. There's 2 90-day OMB periods, for example, that don't have to take 90 days. If OMB takes 30 days instead of 90 days on those 2 time periods, well, you just cut 4 months off of WOTUS rulemaking. Our goal is to have this process done by the end of 2025.
Well, a lot of great quotes from those folks in D.C. this week. And another big topic was the USDA buyouts. More than 15,000 USDA employees have accepted financial incentives to leave the agency, according to a USDA briefing shared with congressional staff and obtained by Reuters. That figure represents roughly 15% of the department's workforce. The departures stem from the Trump administration's efforts to downsize the federal government, or as they called it this week in D.C., right-size the government, offering employees several months of pay and benefits if they voluntarily stepped away. The number could continue to grow in the coming weeks, as workers over age 40 were given extra time to decide. While I was in D.C. this week, Chief of the NRCS, Aubrey J.D. Betancourt, commented on this very issue.
Retention of staff at NRCS has been a problem long before the changes that we're dealing with now. So we actually have an even more intrinsic problem than the right sizing of government that's taking place today. And that's something that we actually have a team assigned to. Why and what do we need to provide to our staff, either when we recruit them or when they're here, to keep them here and to continue to provide them the upward mobility that they need. You know, the number one reason anybody leaves a job is they get bored. Isn't that sad? So what's the problem with NRCS that we are not investing in our teams and in our team members to keep them here and keep them moving? And I got to tell you, one of the biggest problems is underlying infrastructure and cumbersome programs. The same problem that our farmers have is the same problem our staff has. So I actually am confident that the direction that we're going, if we also prioritize the investment in the infrastructure to support that staff, the training to help them move up and continue to gain skill sets, as well as programs that they deliver that are reliable, again, not sitting in front of a spinning wheel of death for 50% of their time, I think we're going to have a great workforce that can deliver and increase our productivity and responsiveness, and that's our goal.
Additionally, Secretary Rollins shares more on what the numbers of employees leaving truly means to the organization.
We are planning to unveil the new USDA reorganization plan next week. So y'all are the first for me to give that date to, but it is coming. And the team has been working very hard on it for a good long while. And I think that especially those in this room will be pleased as we look to analyze, figure out, and provide a solution on how to better serve the American farmer and rancher in rural communities. And perhaps that doesn't mean that we should have so many people in Washington, but more to come on that as we look out into the country. As far as the brain drain, the press has been reporting, and it's a correct number, that under the Deferred Resignation Program, the DRP, we've had about 15,000 USDA employees take that. But I want to put that into context for y'all. USDA has around 106,000 employees in total. Every year, we lose just by attrition between 8 to 10,000 of those employees. So while 15,000, is blasting across a lot of headlines right now, at the end of the day, through the DRP, hopefully the goal is that it isn't too much of a difference. We are right-sizing, we are, quote, downsizing, but I don't think it is as drastic, perhaps, as a lot of people are looking. And I believe that's important. This organization at USDA, especially the farmer and rancher part of the organization, we have a lot of other things we do, has to remain a priority. We have to ensure that we have the right staffing, whether it is our frontliners, so FSA, et cetera. We have put a huge effort on ensuring that those remain fully staffed and, in fact, become better staffed. And then also on our firefighting front, our wildland firefighters through the Forest Service. Those remain priority. And, in fact, we've not accepted the recent DRPs from either one of those groups and have signed a memorandum that no funding freeze or spending freeze or hiring freeze will apply to any of those frontliners or our firefighters.
Well, with that news, we also saw President Trump's 2026 budget proposal is drawing mixed reactions in the Senate, especially regarding an 18% cut to the USDA's funding. The latest round of proposed budget cuts will not touch the mandatory programs like crop insurance, commodity support, or SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, but there is critical discretionary funding for agricultural research and rural development that he has placed on the chopping block. At the Senate Ag Appropriations Subcommittee hearing on Tuesday, Chair John Hoeven of North Dakota said lawmakers can work with the USDA to reduce costs, but not at the expense of critical farm services. He said that they are going to be delivering the same service that keeps families and businesses on those farms and ranches going. Some senators have challenged the proposed budget. Congresswoman Shaheen from New Hampshire argued the budget undercuts rural America. Shaheen stated, "I don't believe we put rural America on a path to thrive, slashing the core development programs." Congress has until September 30th to pass a new budget.
Yeah, budget wasn't one we talked too much about other than its relationship there to some of those USDA cuts. So we'll see here what comes out of that. But earlier this week, in relation to some of those budget cuts, we saw the Food and Nutrition Service announced a major change for SNAP programming. States will now be required to share all records related to SNAP benefits and allotments with the federal government. The move follows President Trump's March 20th executive order aimed at eliminating information silos across federally funded programs. The order directs agencies to ensure the federal government has full access to data, even when the data is stored by third parties. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is, of course, federally funded through the Farm Bill and administered by states, and includes relationships with processors and retailers, amongst others, all of which are currently in information silos. Today's guidance prioritizes program integrity and will allow FNS, for the first time, transparency into the data long only held by states and electronic benefit transfer, or EBT, processors.
Well, we also saw, Delaney, that there's a delay, surprise, in regards to the Farm Bill. House leaders are delaying the planned Agricultural Committee markup that was expected to begin this week, as key issues remain unsolved in the GOP's massive domestic policy bill. This marks the second delay in recent days for major committee markups, including one from the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Tax Writing, Ways and Means panel. Republicans are relying on these committees to identify spending cuts needed to finance their proposed tax cuts. Not good news there. A lot of positive updates this week, but this delay comes as the Agricultural Committee faces significant challenges and concerns from lawmakers about deep cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, as formerly known as food stamps. There are growing signals, as like we reported on, that the new Farm Bill may not come together in 2025, as Republican leaders are considered incorporating Biden-era conservation programs into their party line mega bill, rather than pursuing a separate Farm Bill reauthorization. This is a shift in strategy, and that shift in strategy suggests Republicans may be uncertain about passing a bipartisan farm bill this year. Reports indicate that Republicans are considering pulling unspent funds from 2022's climate law to continue supporting conservation programs. Despite this potential move, Democrats remain uncertain about their chances for a new farm bill, with divisions still that linger over the proposed changes. I didn't know you could do that, pull money out of a previous year that wasn't spent. You'd think that just goes into
Would roll over
a savings account. Yes. So more updates to come on that, Delaney.
Well, we've got lots of D.C. related news this week. I don't think it's only because I was in D.C. There's just a lot going on. But Democratic senators are pressing the USDA to explain why the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, must approve certain farm loans and loan guarantees before they're issued. The request follows a letter sent late Tuesday to Secretary Rollins, led by Senator Amy Klobuchar, and signed by 16 other senators. The lawmakers are seeking details on how these reviews are being conducted and whether DOGE will also oversee other USDA farm assistance programs. The letter follows a Reuters report about a policy change outlined in an April 29th memo requiring farm loans and loan guarantees over $500,000 to be reviewed and cleared by USDA's Chief Financial Officer and DOGE employees before approval. Senators, including Ron Wyden and Adam Schiff, have raised concerns about potential delays and added oversight for USDA's farm loan programs. That's a very good point. Government doesn't typically move quickly, and how does this new layer of hierarchy, I guess, add maybe delays to farmers' ability?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. We did see a new study that was commissioned by the Clean Fuels Alliance of America that showed U.S. bio-based diesel industry generated $42.4 million in economic activity and over 107,000 jobs in 2024.
I think that was a billion.
Oh.
Million, that was a B.
According to this report, half of the total economic impact, $19.9 billion and 41,500 jobs, came from fuel production, while oilseed supported 30,000 and more jobs, and other economic activity delivered major benefits to soybean growing states. Significantly, employment was also reported in the oilseed processing place of jobs of 8,600 and rendering of 12,700 jobs. Donnell, the CEO of Clean Fuels, said the numbers don't lie. 2024 was a record-setting year for clean fuels, and the benefits reached deep into rural America. Adding, this study proves that biodiesel and renewable diesel is not only lower carbon emissions, but delivers real income and real jobs, especially for soybean producers and the broader agricultural economy. The study also analyzes a near future capacity scenario of 7.4 billion gallons, correct, it should have been billion, based upon publicly announced investments in new and expanded facilities. So that was an upbeat.
It was. We didn't get clear direction, though, on what the future of biofuels looks like. We're going to talk more about that next week on the show. But Bayer did announce it is leaving the seed treatment equipment business in the U.S. to help bolster the company's finances. Reuters says a spokesman confirmed in an email that Bayer was exiting the business, which makes equipment designed to help treat seeds with products like fungicides and insecticides before those seeds, of course, are planted. An email from Bayer says the company decided to shift resources toward primary areas of strength in crop protection products. Bayer said that it was a difficult decision but necessary to help secure the financial future of their company. The company will begin closing a $12 million seed treatment equipment manufacturing facility in Minnesota. The center has sought to improve research links between equipment and seed treatment products. The Seed Growth Equipment Innovation Center opened back in 2015, and Bayer says they're still committed to seed treatments even though they will no longer be manufacturing those seed treatment equipment pieces. Tanner, I'm pretty excited for today's interview because we are talking to a really cool business owner, Landom Oldham. He's got such a unique story to tell about his journey into agribusiness ownership, so let's get into it. Well, we're so excited today to be joined by a guy doing some cool and unique things out in Kansas. We're joined today by Landom Oldham, the owner and founder of Heartland Soil Services. Landon, thanks for joining today on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Delaney. I'm excited.
So Landon, let's get right into it. You have a super unique background, maybe a little bit of the backstory here. My husband connected us a couple of months ago, and you're just doing some really unique and engaging things for your part of Kansas. And we thought, what a great interview and opportunity to bring you on to talk about your business model you've created, but also some of the unique things you're doing as it relates to soil health, soil sampling, soil technologies, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But Landon, let's first start with your background.
Okay, so I live in Cunningham, Kansas, a very small rural community in south central Kansas, about 1 hour west of Wichita. This is where I grew up. Started kindergarten here and went all the way through 12th grade, We ended up going to Kansas State University, graduated Kansas State University with a degree in agricultural business. While at Kansas State, I was working for a company called Record Harvest. Record Harvest at that point in time was a third-party precision ag dealer, which when I say precision ag, I'm talking about the actual equipment. So Trimble, Ag Leader, the bolt-on stuff. That was before everything came from the factory with autopilot, with variable rate technology, with yield monitors. So we were selling and installing all of that technology on farmers' equipment. I did that until probably 2009. And in 2009, I kind of had the aha moment of this equipment can do so much more than what we're actually allowing it to do. We had done some of this at Record Harvest, but again, our primary focus was the hardware. And at that point in time, the goal was how to make the equipment work for the farmer. And so I came home one day, and my wife, when I was in college, I had bought a house in Cunningham. I knew I always wanted to be back in Cunningham, and I ended up marrying my wife, Vicky. We met in grade school, right? I mean, we had the grade school. Our first kiss was in third grade. We had a friend sitting over there counting one, two, three. And she ended up going to college with me as well, and she got an ag business degree as well. But anyways, I came home. My wife was pregnant with our first child, Morgan. And I said, "Hey, listen, I got an idea." I said, "I've been selling guys this equipment. It's capable of doing so much more than what they're actually using it for." And I told her about Heartland Soil. At that point, it was soil sampling. Our focal point was soil sampling. And I told her about Heartland Soil Sampling. And I said, I think this will work. And she said, "Yeah, it sounds like a really good idea. Collect infield data, on-farm data, process it into something that's tangible, something that's usable, and allow those growers to capitalize on the investment they've already made in the equipment." So I said, "Yeah, I hope it works." And she kind of paused, hope it works. What do you mean? I said, "Well, I quit my job today." And, you can just see her. She's like, "Oh my gosh." She says, "Landon, you do realize I'm 8 months pregnant with our first child. We have just bought a new to us house, and now you have no income." And she was at the time working for Farm Credit, a ag lending bank in Pratt, and she was the breadwinner, you know. But anyways, long story short, hit the ground running. She says, "All right, well, let's go." Hit the ground running. Started off by myself. Hired our first employee about a year after starting Heartland, and just kind of all really took off from there. We've grown. We changed our name to Heartland Soil Services, so it wasn't so specific to sampling, although that is where a lot of our focal point lies. But fast forward to today, and we now have. Last year we had just under 50 employees. We cover the entire state of Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado. We cover Nebraska. We just opened a new location a year or so ago in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So now we're covering Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, and even out into Wyoming considerably. Have another partner, a location in Chester, Montana. So we're able to reach out to Montana pretty easily. And then we are currently in the process of opening, well, not currently in the process of, we have opened most recently a new location in Mesa, Washington. So clear up there in the northeast or northwest portion of the United States. So yeah, our primary focus has been soil collection and soil data processing and analysis to increase on-farm efficiencies. We also have a pretty wide stroke within irrigation technology. We work very closely with a company called Autonomous Pivot to implement water use efficiencies for the grower. At the end of the day, what it really comes down to is the old way of just putting just a relative number of 100 pounds of fertilizer on every acre. It's just not feasible. I mean, with commodity prices where they are and input prices having skyrocketed and not necessarily following the same roller coaster ride the commodities follow. When commodities go up, so do inputs, but commodities come down and inputs don't come near as far. So let's create that efficiency. We work very closely in that regard. We process a lot of data, yield data, and any other soils data, planting data, farm data in general, to help farmers make educated decisions, to help farmers be maybe more proactive than reactive. We use imagery very, very heavily within some of our services, and we also, probably 6 years ago, implemented a new department within Heartland Soil Services called Farm Comp. So our Farm Comp department is pretty much our own NRCS, National Resource Conservation Society. So we have a team of individuals that are certified technical service providers for the NRCS that they can go to our growers with opportunities to help them afford some of the practice changes that are being implemented or being encouraged for farmers to take on to be a little bit more conservative, prevent some of the runoff, no-till, variable rate, application, cover crops. There's just a whole gamut of them. I think there's over 900 codes.
Wow. So you've just built this really big entity, a beast of a company, if you will. And so I want to go back a little bit to your origin story. Did you grow up on a farm? Did you grow up in an entrepreneurial family? Or how did you have that drive to say, I'm going to just go out and start my own business? Because I think that's unique to a certain type of person that is looking at, oh, I'm going to have a baby. My wife is 8 months pregnant. We just bought a new house, but let's add another level of craziness and complexity to our lives.
Yeah, no, I did not grow up on a farm. Actually, I grew up, so Cunningham, if I were to describe Cunningham, I would describe it as the modern day Mayberry. I don't know if you ever watched Andy Griffith growing up, but it is the modern day Mayberry. We still have a handful of dirt roads in town. There is not a single stoplight in town, and the population is only 400. Very, very clean community, very nice community. We have our post office, the bank. We've got local restaurants, our own doctor. I mean, again, truly the modern day Mayberry. I grew up in a split family. My parents were divorced when I was young. I was in Oklahoma, and my mom married a gentleman from Cunningham, and I moved to Cunningham about the time I was 5 years old. So I'm an only child. My stepdad was a carpenter, my mom a nurse, and my real dad, my biological father, he was superintendent for State Farm. So not much of an ag background whatsoever. Although growing up in a rural community, all of my friends grew up on the farm and farmed. So, that created that desire that for me to want to be involved with the farm, to be able to relate with my friends. So I started working when I was in junior high. I started working for a lot of local farmers in the area. And that was kind of where my passion grew. One of the ones that I was with probably the most and for the longest was DeWeese Family Farms here in Cunningham. And I learned a lot about the farm, a lot about cattle operations in general. And, that just catapulted me to want to know more. As far as my drive and determination, I think that comes from having been an only child. I didn't have, when I was young, I did not have the greatest relationship with my stepfather. And so and my dad was always traveling for work with State Farm. So I kind of learned to fend for myself. I didn't have somebody to rely on. And so I just kind of became very, very independent at a very young age, almost a little defiant, maybe, if you will. My mom always told me the worst thing she could ever tell me is that I couldn't do something because the first thing I was going to do is do exactly what she told me I couldn't do. So I think that, people can look at that kind of a background as a negative. I see it as a positive. That's what kind of built me into who I am today, and I don't regret it. And to my stepfather, we've got a great relationship now. We're great friends, but yeah.
It's interesting how those, small moments in life that don't seem big at the time really define who you are and push that drive. So thank you for sharing some of that background with me and our listeners. I think that's really helpful to kind of understanding who Landon is. And I'm guessing that probably having not grown up on a farm, that drive and desire to really understand things maybe at a more holistic level than a farmer even would, has really helped your business succeed and flourish. So Landon, as you've been building this business, you've added in different services, you're helping growers in different ways. What's been the biggest surprise that you've learned in your time in doing this?
I don't know that I necessarily have a big surprise. Um, the biggest challenge that I may have faced was getting my customers to think a little bit outside of the box with me. To your point, you're correct. I didn't grow up with this channel type, driven mindset that this is how we do it. This is how we always do it. I grew up with the mindset of this is how we do it, but is there another way? And so I'm always thinking about an easier, simpler way to function. And when I would come to initially in the beginning, when I started the company, my goal was no less than 3 sales calls a day. I was very, very adamant about making at least 3 sales calls a day. And I'd get up every morning, and in Kansas, our roads are on a grid system. So every road is north and south, east and west. And I just run the dirt roads. And if there was a tractor sitting around, I'd throw a business card. If they were standing in the shop yard, I'd say something to them. But it was hard to get them to comprehend what I was trying to portray. Ultimately, oh no, we just put 100 pounds of fertilizer on. Yeah, but guys, so that was a little bit of my probably my biggest challenge was getting them to think along the same lines that I was thinking, to say, you don't have to put 100 pounds here. This area might not have called for any, but there's an area over here that might have called for 200. So you've over applied here, you've under applied here, and nobody wins. So as far as the challenge, that was my biggest challenge.
Yeah, because, when back in 2009, that's that's over 2 decades ago, and things have really changed and progressed in the soil health space, especially when we think about smart agriculture or regenerative agriculture, all of these new buzzwords that have come out here over the last few years. What has been the evolution of maybe farmers' mindset and adoption, but also just the industry to be more accepting of maybe some of these ideas that you were promoting before maybe the industry was really ready for it?
People change for 2 reasons, and I truly believe this, and I say it a lot. People change, one, because they have to, they're forced to, or two, because they become educated. And I think you're experiencing both of those in today's environment, with all of the pressures being put on farmers, people thinking that we're over applying fertilizers, and we're killing the soil, and we're creating, climate change, we're creating global warming, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of pressure being put on a farmer right now. Um, you know, the big transition was, I guess, obviously now, and I've been invited multiple times to speak at Kansas State University's precision ag class. When I graduated college, precision ag wasn't even on the tip of their tongue. So it wasn't anything that you could go and get a formal education around, which you can now. And so you start to see this younger generation. I think technology has advanced substantially. The younger generation, the up and coming farmers that are looking to take over the farm at one point, are more progressive in that approach because they're very familiar with technology. Not all of, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of the older generation, you know, you throw an iPhone or a computer into their hands, and they're kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And so that generational shift, if you will, has propelled this industry to the next level.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about the transitions that are happening now and going to continue happening. USDA put out a stat. I like to use this a lot. I think it just puts it in perspective to your point about the generational shift. About 70% of all of our farms are going to switch hands over the next 10 to 15 years, or in that process now. So we're definitely starting to see that shift and divide. And it sounds like you're well positioned to help the next generation as they're becoming the decision makers to continue to do things a little bit smarter or farm a little bit smarter. But Landon, you're also kind of in the tech space because you're also a fellow podcaster. Talk to us a little bit about your podcast, In the Row.
Yeah, so In the Row is a podcast that we started, last summer, I guess it would have been. It's intended very similar to what you're doing here. It's intended to just have general conversation, to be able to bring producers. A lot of times I like to bring producers, our customers, on board to have conversations around how they're functioning, what they're working with, what's working, what's not working, have those just open discussions. And I mean, I think, farmers are always trying to educate themselves. They're always trying to learn more. What's next? What's the best opportunity? What hybrid and varieties work here? What products work? And so what I really wanted to bring to our customer base is that open conversation with other growers, other farmers. So it becomes more peer to peer. It's not a sales opportunity. It's not somebody trying to just hammer their product or their service down your throat. It's a true conversation around other farmers, other growers' experiences with certain services and products, and the industry as a whole. We talked quite a bit about carbon. We've talked about autonomous pivots, some different technologies that are out there. So I think it's something just intended to educate growers as to what might be out there.
Do you need to live in your geography for that podcast to be relevant?
Oh no, not for a minute.
That's great. Well, I'm glad we've brought that resource to our listeners today. But Landon, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you for a planting season update. We're in the heart of planting season. How are things looking in your part of Kansas?
It's wet, which is great. I mean, we have been in such a severe drought for the last 4 to 5 years anyways, which has made it even that much more difficult on our local farmers. Not only have, not to be negative, but not only have commodity prices been at all-time lows and inputs been at all-time highs in our immediate region, especially here in Kansas, we just haven't had any rain. And, it's not necessarily about the amount of rainfall anymore. It's about the timing of the rainfall. Can we get it at the right time, which it always is? And realistically, how much moisture can we hold? Which comes back to some different farming practices. What's our organic matter look like? What's our holding capacity? But right now, we're teed up for a really good wheat harvest, I do believe. We just got a couple of inch rain over the course of the last week. It came nicely. Not a whole lot of runoff. It all went right where we needed it to, from a production standpoint, grain production standpoint. Some of that wheat was already starting to curl back and turn blue. This came along and really, really saved the day. It was no less than $1 million rain. That also came right here for planting season. A lot of guys had some of their corn in the ground. Our frost-free date is April 15th, and wouldn't you know it, we had a heavy freeze on April 15th naturally. And so, I think that there might have been some corn that was up and may not have appreciated that too much. I don't know how big of an impact it's really truly going to have, but since then, planters have been rolling, and soil moisture is good, and I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic by nature, but I'm very optimistic to see what this season's going to provide.
Well, thanks for sharing that little update with our listeners. I feel like we've just started to scratch the story of who you are, but unfortunately we're out of time. If any of our listeners want to learn more about you, your podcast, or your business, where can they go to find more information?
Yeah, just go to www.heartlandsoilservices.com, and that's our website. You should be able to find any and all resources that you might need there, from contact information to even extensions to our podcast.
Perfect, Landon. Well, we'll have to have you on again sometime soon to talk more about soil health and some of the cool things you guys are doing. But thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for doing that interview, Delaney, and for being able to share that with our audience. Now let's take a quick look into our markets. Of course, Josh Linville's latest fertilizer media update stated that Chinese urea exports remained low, while concerns exist over losing Iranian exports due to Trump's threats, but there has been a recent calming that suggests threats may be reduced. North America urea values have increased sharply due to high demand, and UAN supplies are limited, with retailers asking to price June shipment products to ensure their availability. China's phosphate exports were extremely low in the first quarter of 2025, with expectations that they return in June or July, while India's phosphate buying patterns have caused price fluctuations. The potash market remains quiet, with buyers waiting for manufacturers to fill summer programs and look for potential price decreases. Not a lot of action on the fertilizer side, Delaney. What was happening in other markets this week?
Well, certainly we saw a strong weekly export sales report for corn, soybeans, and wheat, but that didn't really seem to support the corn market this week, as attention is certainly focused on great progress that we've seen in planting and opportunities still ahead to finish up planting, just putting some downward pressure on corn prices. Soybeans, however, remain pretty optimistic about that 3-day trade meeting with the U.S. and China in Geneva this weekend. Then next week on Monday, we're going to see our May WASDE report, which is really going to be, according to Seth Myers, the chief economist with USDA, the first outlook on if those tariffs go into place, what the year's coming impact will be. He's expecting to see USDA WASDE's report reflect some of those potential changes in export sales. As we think about some of the other larger markets here, optimism around the UK trade deal pushed Wall Street higher as well. The sentiment here is this is just one of many deals yet to come. Maybe we'll even see a Chinese trade deal come out of this weekend in Switzerland. And then as we look at the cattle markets, weekly export sales there were lackluster for beef and pork this week, but that didn't stop new all-time highs being put in once again on the cattle side. August and September feeder cattle have now touched over $300 per hundredweight. Cash hasn't quite caught up yet, but regardless, markets are still looking strong. And when we asked Dr. Seth Meyers a little bit more about the potential slowdown here on the cattle side, we talked a lot about heifer retention, which he said was what he was going to be watching as an indicator to show us if the cattle markets were going to be slowing down. And he unfortunately didn't have a particular number he was looking for there that would kind of signal a slowdown in the markets ahead, but it has certainly been a multi-year long bull run here for the cattle markets, and it hasn't slowed down.
Yeah, I was going to say it's been a wild ride. Well, it sounds like you had a lot of fun in D.C. I can't wait for you to go on one of your next trips, but do appreciate every one of our listeners, as we do every week, for tuning in. Make sure you come back next Friday to catch fresh content and hit up those social media channels in the meantime to share some of those key moments from today's interview.
Absolutely. Tanner, with that, should we let the people go?
Let's let them go.